Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The book was paper. That was the first thing Yevi noticed. Not the girl holding it. Not the corner table she had chosen. Not even the fact that she was human, a species Yevi had never sat near before. It was the book. Paper. Thin, worn at the edges, the kind of object that belonged in a history display, not in the hands of a student on Station Orange 7 where every surface was a screen and every screen was alive with light. Yevi stood at the edge of the cafeteria with her food tray and nowhere to sit. The hall was full of noise. Daraki students occupied the long center tables, loud and broad-shouldered, their plated backs catching the overhead light. A group of Thalrai clustered near the water dispensers, their forearms moving in quiet conversation. Somewhere near the far wall, a Lumi student, one of Yevi's own kind, sat alone and did not look up when she entered. Nobody moved to make space. Yevi's wings folded tight against her back the way they always did when she was uncertain. She was small even for a Lumi, and the cafeteria felt large in the way that rooms feel large when you have no place in them. Then the human girl looked up. She did not wave or call out. She simply looked at Yevi, then looked at the empty seat across from her, then looked back at her book. The message was plain enough. Yevi sat down carefully, setting her tray on the table. "Thank you," she said. The girl nodded without looking up. Sure. Her name, Yevi would learn later, was Nora. She was in 3 of Yevi's academic courses, biology, galactic history, and a combined linguistics seminar, and Yevi had not noticed her in any of them. She had the kind of presence that did not demand attention. Medium height for a human. Brown hair pulled back without care. Clothes that were clean, but chosen for function, not appearance. She held the paper book the way someone holds a familiar thing, not carefully, but comfortably, like it had been opened 1,000 times and would be opened 1,000 more. "What are you reading?" Yevi asked. Nora turned the cover toward her briefly. The title was in a human language Yevi did not read, but the image showed trees. Dark trees and snow. "A story set in a cold place," Nora said. "I like cold place stories." Yevi did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing and began eating. The cafeteria shifted around them the way it always did at midday. Students arriving and leaving, conversations rising and falling, the low hum of the station underneath everything like a second heartbeat. Yevi was halfway through her food when the noise near the center tables changed in a way she recognized. It became louder, but structured. Performative. Grawl. He was Daraki, which meant he was large by any standard, but he was also the Kindoff large that had learned to use doorways and low ceilings as tools of presence. He moved through the cafeteria with his 2 closest companions and the particular walk-off, someone who had never been told to slow down. Other students shifted without being asked. Gaps opened. A younger Lumi student near the center aisle pulled their tray close and looked away. Grawl passed Yevi's table without stopping. But his shoulder moved, just slightly, and Yevi's second tray, the one she had set at the edge for her dessert cup, slid and tipped. The cup hit the floor. The contents spread in a pale green circle. Laughter from the 2 companions. Grawl did not look back. Yevi sat very still. Her wings flattened further. She stared at the mess on the floor and felt the familiar heat behind her eyes that she had learned to control because showing it only made things worse. Then Nora set her book down. She stood, went to the dispenser station on the near wall, pulled a cloth from the stack beside it, came back, and crouched down. She cleaned up the spill with the same efficiency she might use to wipe a desk. No expression of irritation. No comment. She dropped the cloth in the waste bin, sat back down, and picked up her book. "You don't have to do that," Yevi said quietly. "It was my tray. I was closer to the cloths," Nora said. "He does that," Yevi said. "To me. To others. He won't stop." She said it the way you say something you have accepted. Nora turned a page. "I know," she said. "I've seen him do it twice before." Yevi blinked. And Nora did not answer immediately. She read a line or 2. Then she said, "And nothing yet." Yet, the word sat on the table between them like a small stone. Yevi looked at the human girl. Her quiet hands, her easy posture, The way her eyes had already moved back towed page, as if Grawl were simply weather that had passed. There was no tension in her, no fear, but also no performance of being unafraid, which was a different thing entirely. That evening, Yevi passed the corridor near the Easter exercise bay and heard a sound through the half-open door. Rhythmic, controlled. She looked in without meaning to. Nora was moving through something. Not quite a dance, not quite a fight. A slow sequence of steps and positions that shifted her weight in ways Yevi did not understand. Her feet were bare on the floor. Her breathing was even. She was noticing any equipment. She did not need any. Yevi watched for a moment and then walked on. Later, she told a classmate about the human girl in the corner with the paper book. Strange? The classmate asked. Yevi thought about it. Not in a bad way, she said. The file was 43 lines long. Ambassador Dorrell had reviewed thousands of student files during his years with the Galactic Council's Education Division. Most ran long. Daraki files alone averaged 200 lines between medical records, lineage documentation, combat assessment scores, and social rank histories. Even Lumi files were dense with sensory evaluations and light pattern behavioral charts. Humans were new to the integration program, and her files, frankly, had always been thin. Limited history. No psionic scores. No venom classification. No natural armor rating. The Council's intake assessors had begun leaving those categories blank for human students rather than filling them with a long column of zeros. 43 lines should have meant an unremarkable student. Dorrell read the file a second time. The opening was standard. Name, age, planet of origin, Earth, northern region, a country called Russia. He almost moved on. Then as I caught the incident notation near the bottom, it was filed under the category labeled simply, prior environmental exposure, age 9. Passenger aircraft, a small private vessel, suffered mechanical failure over a wilderness region designated Siberia. Both parents confirmed deceased on impact. One survivor. The survivor was Nora Hallis. She had been alone for 22 months. Dorrell set down the report and looked at the far wall of his temporary office on Station Orange 7. 22 months. He did a quiet calculation. She would have been 9 years old at the start, 11 when found. The rescue team's notation was brief, almost clinical. Subject was located approximately 83 kilometers from the crash site, in adequate physical health, with evidence of constructed shelter and maintained fire. Subject was calm and oriented upon contact. Subject asked if there was food. That was all it said. Dorrell pulled up the station's current staff directory and sent a message to Warden Soa requesting a brief consultation. Then he sat and looked at the file again. He was thinking about the 83 kilometers. He was thinking about what 83 kilometers of Siberian wilderness meant. He had done some work near Earth's polar regions years ago during a resource survey. He remembered the cold as a physical presence, not merely a temperature. He remembered how quickly the terrain changed and how little it cared. He remembered thinking that nothing small could survive out there for long. But something small had. Warden Soa arrived 20 minutes later, all four arms folded in the configuration that meant she was busy and being polite about it. She was a Thalrai and therefore efficient, which Dorrell respected. She sat across from him and waited. He turned the file toward her. This student. Tell me about her. Soa glanced at it. Nora Hallis. Human. Second-year intake. No behavioral reports. No academic concerns. No flags. She paused. Frankly, Ambassador, she is one of the quieter students we have enrolled. She causes no difficulty. Has she made friends? One. A Lumi student. Yevi. Soa tilted her head. An unusual pairing. The Luma child is quite anxious. The human is not. The human is not, Dorrell repeated slowly. He leaned back. You've read her background record? I reviewed all intake files at the start of term. And you weren't curious? Soa's skin shifted color slightly, the Thalrai equivalent of a small frown. She survived a difficult event. Humans are resilient. It is noted in their species documentation. Resilient, Dorrell said. He said it the same way one might describe the temperature of a room before specifying it was the surface of a star. Soa left shortly afterward, unconvinced that anything required her attention. Darrell did not blame her. The file looked unremarkable to anyone who read it at pace. It wasted when you stopped and sat with the numbers. 9 years old, 83 kilometers, 22 months, that the shape of it changed. He added a note to his personal log. Just 2 words and a name. Monitor. Hallis. Then he went to observe the afternoon biology lecture. Nora was in the 3rd row. She was writing notes by hand, paper again, or something like it, while the instructor projected cellular diagrams overhead. The Dorcas students in the back were talking quietly among themselves, the way students at the top of social structure do when they have decided the class is beneath their attention. The Lumi girl, Yevi, was in the 2nd row, wings faintly lit in the pale gold that Doral understood meant concentration. Nora did not look up from her notes. A student 2 seats over knocked a stylus off the edge of the desk. Nora's hand moved. She caught it before it reached the floor. She set it back without looking. Without breaking her writing, the other students stared at her. Nora kept writing. Doral watched the rest of the lecture from the observation panel. He watched Nora take notes, ask one precise question during the discussion period, and gather her things when the session ended. He watched her wait at the door for Yevi, who had gotten caught trying to organize her bag, and he watched her stand there without impatience, just standing, watching the corridor, present in the way that certain things are present. That he thought again about the forest, about the cold, about a child who had walked 83 kilometers out of it, and asked if there was food. He updated his note. Monitor. Hallis. Reason. Instinct. 3 weeks into the term, the corridors of Station Orin 7 had their own rhythms, and Yevi had learned most of them the hard way. She knew which hallways Grawl used after the evening meal. She knew which junctions had no security panels and which bins in the corridor offered no clear sightlines from the main path. She had learned all of this not from a map, but from experience, from the particular education of being small in a place that rewarded size. She had adjusted her routes accordingly. She arrived to meals early or very late. She moved along walls rather than through open centers of rooms. She had become, without meaning to, an expert in being overlooked. It worked. Mostly. On the evening it stopped working, she had stayed late in the library annex to finish a translation assignment. She had watched the time carefully. She had planned her route. But the annex system had logged her out early due to a power cycle, and she had to resubmit 15 minutes of work, and those 15 minutes were enough. The corridor between the East Study Wing and the residential block was lit in the soft amber of station night mode. It was not dark, but it was quiet. No other students. The distant hum of the ventilation system. Her own footsteps, then other footsteps. Grawl came around the far corner with one companion. He slowed when he saw her, then smiled, or did the Dyraki equivalent, which involved the plate above his jaw lifting in a way that was not friendly. Lumi, he said. Not her name. Her species, the way you might name an object. Yevi stopped walking. She did not run. She had learned that running made it worse, made it a game, and she was tired of being a game. You're out late, Grawl said. He stepped closer. His companion stayed back, watching the corridor both ways. The small ones should stay in their rooms at night. The station could be confusing, easy to get turned around. Yevi said nothing. She held her bag against her chest and looked at a point just past his shoulder. She had learned this too. Do not look directly at them. Do not give them a reaction. Wait for it to be over. Did you finish the translation assignment? He asked. She nodded, very small. Good. You can send me a copy before morning. Consider it courtesy for walking you home safely. His companion laughed quietly to the far end of the corridor. Someone stepped into view in no hurry. No announcement. One moment the corridor was empty past Grawl's shoulder, and the next it was not. Nora Hallis stood at the far end, bag over one shoulder, holding nothing, doing nothing except being there. She had come from the direction off the residential block. She was not running. She had not been running. She had simply arrived, the way she seemed to do things, without event, without signal. Grawl turned his head. He looked at her for a moment. Human, he said. The same tone, the object-naming tone. Nora walked forward at the same unhurried pace until she was perhaps 4 body lengths away. Then she stopped. Let her go, she said. Her voice was conversational. She could have been asking the time. Grawl tilted his head. Is this your concern? Yes. He considered her for a moment. Her size, which was less than nothing compared to Tohi's, her posture, which was relaxed in a way that he perhaps read as submission, her hands, which were empty and loose at her sides. He arrived at a conclusion. Leave, he said, before I decide to practice on something easier to break. Nora did not move. Not one step back, not a shift of weight, nothing. She stood there the way a post stands in ground. Not aggressive, just fixed. I'm giving you a chance, she said. Take it. The companion behind Grawl made a short sound of amusement. Grawl's expression shifted from casual to annoyed. He was not accustomed to being still, being looked at, and being told anything. The combination did not suit him. Last warning, human. That was mine, Nora said. Grawl stepped toward her. Yevi had seen fights before. On Orin. 7, they were usually brief because the size difference between species made most confrontations one-sided and fast. She expected this to be the same. She expected Nora to step back, or try to step back, or simply have no time to do either. She closed her wings over her eyes the way Lumi children do when they do not want to see something. She heard a sound. A short, dense sound, the kind made by mass meeting resistance seat speed. Then a longer sound. Then silence. She waited. Yevi. Nora's voice. Calm. Yevi opened her wings. Grawl was on the floor. His companion was against the wall, 3 steps back, very still, staring at Nora with an expression Yevi had not seen on a Dyraki before. Something that was working hard to not be what it was. Nora was standing where she had been standing. Her bag was still on her shoulder. She had not even set it down. She looked at Grawl for one moment. He was not badly hurt. He was on the floor, and he was confused, and he was quiet, and none of those were things he was used to being. Nora looked at Yevi. Come on, she said. It's late. She turned and walked back toward the residential block. Yevi hurried after her, her wings still half folded, her heart making sounds she could feel in her throat. Neither of them looked back. Later, when Warden Soa reviewed the corridor footage for the 3rd time, she would try to count. She would slow the recording down to a fraction of its speed, pause it, go back, and count again 0.3 seconds. Perhaps less. She would watch it again after that, not to count, but because she still did not entirely believe what she was counting in the corridor. In real time, with no one watching who understood what they were seeing, it had happened like this. Grawl stepped forward. He was large in the way Dyraki were large. Not fat, not slow, but genuinely massive, the product of a species that had lived for 1,000 generations on a high-gravity world where the animals had been large and difficult and the ones who survived had passed that knowledge into their bones. When a Dyraka moved toward you with intent, the ground noticed. Nora moved sideways, not back, not away, sideways, a single smooth step that took her out of the direct line and put her inside the arc of his reach, which was the last place anything with instincts was supposed to go. Grawl's momentum was already committed. He had pushed off with the weight of someone who had never needed to recalculate. And so his body continued in the direction it had chosen, and she was no longer where his body had expected her to be. Her left hand found his wrist. Her right elbow moved. Her hip turned. Grawl went down. It was not a slow fall. It was the fast, surprise fall of something that had expected to find resistance, and found nothing. Found only a redirected version of itself, aimed at the floor, and the floor did not give. He hit the station corridor hard enough to make a sound that echoed that he lay there. He blinked. He processed the ceiling above him with the expression off someone experiencing a fact they had not included in their model of the world. His companion pressed back against the wall and made no further moves. Nora picked up her bag from where she had set it on the floor. She had set it down at some point. Soa could see on the footage between Grawl beginning to move and the moment of contact, which meant there had been a moment in which she had time to set her bag down, and she looked at Grawl for exactly as long as it took her toad side. He was not going to get up immediately. Then she looked at Yevi. That was in Nora's quarters 20 minutes later. The aftermath looked like this. 2 cups, a small portable heating unit that was not standard Academy issue, but had been allowed through intake on the list of cultural necessities, and a folded cloth that smelled like something dried and earthy that Yevi did not have a name for. Yevi sat on the edge of the chair with her wings drawn close. Her hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the particular aftermath of fear, which is its own separate thing and sometimes worse than the feeling itself. She held the cup with both hands because both hands were unsteady, and 2 was better than 1 that the tea was pale orange. Not a galactic standard blend. Something human. "What is this?" she asked. "Chamomile," Nora said. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor across from her, both hands around her own cup, entirely calm. "It's a flower. People used to drink it when they were nervous." "I'm not nervous," Yevi said. Nora said nothing. There's a difference between nervous and—" Yevi stopped. Her wings flickered. "I'm a little nervous." "I know." Yevi looked into the cup. "Where did you learn to do that?" Nora thought for a moment. Not in the way someone thinks when they're deciding what to say, but in the way someone thinks when they're genuinely looking for the right answer to a real question. "I'm not sure I learned it," she said at last. "I just practiced staying alive until it became automatic." Yevi looked at her. "In Siberia?" It was the first time either of them had said the word aloud between each other. Nora looked up. "You read my file?" Everyone can read the intake summaries. I was curious. Yevi paused. 2 years, you were 9. I was 9 at the start, Nora said. I was different at the end. The heating unit made a small sound. Somewhere in the station, the ventilation shifted registers for the night cycle, and the ambient hum dropped by half a tone that Yevi's wings had stopped shaking. The chamomile was helping, or the company was helping, or both. "He's going to be very angry," Yevi said. "Probably," Nora agreed. "And embarrassed. Which is worse for Daraki. Also probably." Yevi looked at her. "You're not worried?" Nora considered this seriously. "Worrying about things that haven't happened uses energy I might need later," she said. "I've learned to spend it carefully." She said it plainly, not as a lesson, not as advice, just as a fact about herself, the way you might mention that you prefer one food over another. Yevi sat with it for a moment and found she believed it entirely. Not because it sounded wise, but because it sounded old. Older than 17 years had any right to sound. Down the corridor, in the security monitoring center, Warden Soa watched the footage a 4th time. She was going to have to file a report. She was going to Tohavi to categorize this, assign it a code, send it up the chain. She watched Nora set down her bag. She watched the step, the wrist, the elbow, the hip. She watched Grawl find the floor. She opened a message to Ambassador Doral. She wrote, "I think you need to see this." Then after a pause, she wrote, "I have watched it 4 times and I'm still not certain what I watched." She sent it and looked at the frozen image on her screen, a human girl, bag on her shoulder, looking at the corridor ahead of her, as if nothing of particular note had just occurred, and she sat with that for a long time. The footage ran for 40 seconds. Doral watched all 40 of them, then watched them again, and then set the display to freeze on the last frame. The one where Nora was looking down the corridor with her bag on her shoulder, and looked at it with his hands folded and his thoughts moving carefully. Warden Soa sat across from him. She had the posture of someone who had prepared several explanations and was no longer confident in any of them. "She's 17, Soa said. It came out less like a fact and more like a question. "Yes," Doral said. "He is 3 times her mass." "Closer to 4, Doral said, by Daraki intake measurements." Soa was quiet for a moment. "What do I file it under?" "Self-defense," Doral said. "Because it was—" He turned off the footage. "I'd like to speak with her." Nora came to the meeting room the way she went everywhere, without hurry, without visible concern. She sat down across from Doral and Soa and looked at both of them with the patient attention of someone who has learned that waiting costs nothing. Doral studied her in person for the first time at close distance. She was not physically remarkable in any way he could point to. Her hands were still. Her breathing was quiet and regular. There were small scars on the backs of her hands and one on her chin, the kind left by cold and rough surfaces rather than any single event. "You know why you're here," Soa said. "Yes," Nora said. "Tell me what happened," Doral said. He said it not in the tone of an interrogation, but in the tone of someone who genuinely wanted to understand something. Nora told him, simply and in order. Yevi was being threatened. She asked Grawl to stop. He chose not to. She gave him a second chance, which he also chose not to take. Then the conversation ended. You said you gave him a chance, Doral said. Those were your words to him? Yes. Why did you phrase it that way? Nora seemed to find this a reasonable question. Because it was true, she said, and because I thought he should know. Doral looked at her for a moment. How did you learn to fight like that? She was quiet for a few seconds, not evasive, thinking. There was a river near where I was living, she said. In the forest. In spring it ran fast. Too fast to cross directly. You couldn't push against it. You had to find the angle where the water helped you. She paused. I think I learned most things that way. So his skin shifted. She said carefully, you were 9 when the crash happened. Yes. And you were alone for nearly 2 years. Yes. Soa leaned forward slightly. You are a child, she said. Not unkindly. More the way you say something when the saying of it is the only way to check if it's still true. Nora looked at her with calm brown eyes. I've been a lot of things, she said. The room was quiet for a moment. Doral excused Nora shortly after. He thanked her. She nodded, picked up her bag, and left without looking back. Her footsteps were quiet in the corridor and then gone. Soa looked at the closed door. What do we do with that? She asked. Doral did not answer right away. He was already opening his log that he wrote for a long time. He wrote about Nora and about the footage and about the forest. He wrote about the question he had been turning over since he first read her file. The question of what humans were actually beneath the thin intake summary that listed their absences. No armor, no venom, no survivability, no enhanced strength. All the categories of visible danger left empty. That he had been thinking about those empty categories the wrong way. He realized that he had been reading them as deficits. He should have been reading them as descriptions of species that did not need any of those things to survive the place it came from. Earth was not gentle. He had read enough of its biology files to know that. Its animals were large, varied, and in many cases actively hostile. Its weather systems were extreme. Its terrain ranged from frozen to burning within a single landmass. And humans, small, unarmored, unvenomous, slow relative to most of the things that shared their world, had not just survived it. They had Waketo every corner of it. They had eaten its animals and mapped its mountains and built cities in its deserts. They had done this with their hands, and their strange compulsive cleverness and the particular quality of not stopping that seemed baked into their biology at a level deeper than thought. Nora had not learned to redirect Grawl's weight from a manual or a class. She had learned it from a river. She had learned it the way everything about her had been learned, from the world pressing hard against her and her mind filing away the answer for next time. That was the thing the intake assessors had missed. Humans did not carry their weapons in their bodies. They carried them in the part of them that watched and adapted and remembered. That part did not show up in any scan that he finished his report. He titled it plainly, Reclassification Recommended Homo Sapiens. He sent it to the Council Species Assessment Division with a note requesting that intake categorization for human students be reviewed before the next enrollment cycle. Then he read back over what he had written and added one final line. The most dangerous thing about Nora Hallis was not what she did in that corridor. It was how little it appeared to cost her that he filed the report. He sat back, outside his office window. The station turned slowly against the stars, the way it always did, indifferent and enormous, full of species who had come here to learn how to share a galaxy. He thought that perhaps the galaxy was still learning what it had let in. 2 weeks after the corridor, Grawl was gone, and no announcement. No formal statement from the academy. His name simply stopped appearing on the class rosters, and his table in the cafeteria was occupied by Unger Daraki students who sat more quietly than he had. The official record noted a voluntary unit transfer, approved within 48 hours of the request, processed without delay. The station moved on. Stations always do. But something small had shifted in the way Orin 7 arranged itself around Nora Hallis. It was not dramatic, Nothing on the station was dramatic if it could be bureaucratic instead. It was more like the adjustment a room makes when furniture is rearranged. Nothing you could point to exactly, but the space felt different than it had before. Students gave her a little more room in the corridors. Not wide berths. Not the exaggerated avoidance that would have meant fear. Just slightly more room than you give someone you have not thought about. The kind of room you give something you have filed quietly into a new category. Nora did not seem to notice. She walked the same routes. She sat at the same corner table. She read her paper books and drank her pale tea and attended her classes with the same steady, unremarkable attention she had always given them. Yevi had started reading human literature. She had asked Nora for a recommendation, and Nora had thought about it for a moment and then given her a title. Yevi had obtained a translation and found it strange and slow and full of long descriptions of weather, and she had been unable to put it down. She could not explain why. She told Nora this. Nora said, human writers spend a lot of time on weather because weather is one off the things that doesn't care about you. We find that interesting. Yevi sat with that and found she understood it more than she expected. They ate together every day now. Yevi talked more than she used to. Nora talked the same amount. It balanced out that on a morning toward the end of the term, a new Dothraki student, young, first intake, still working out the geography of the station and the hierarchy of its populations, sat down 2 seats from Nora and looked at her with the direct open curiosity that young Dothraki had before they learned that curiosity was supposed to look like indifference. You're the human, he said, the one who put Grawl on the floor. Nora turned a page. He fell, she said. The young Dothraki stared at her. He could not tell if it was a joke. He looked at Yevi, who was quietly glowing with suppressed amusement in the way that Lumido when something is genuinely funny to them. He fell, the young Dothraki repeated, trying the words out. Happens sometimes, Nora said, and kept reading. He left shortly after, looking thoughtful. He told 2 other students what she had said. By midday, it had reached a 3rd table. By the following morning, it had taken on the quality of a phrase people repeated because they liked the shape of it, even if they were not sure what to do with it. Ambassador Doral passed through the cafeteria on the last morning of his station visit. He had 3 meetings scheduled before his departure, and his mind was already partly elsewhere. On the council report he would need to present, on the classification review he had requested, on the long list of things that official visits generated in their wake, that he almost did not stop. But he did stop near the entrance. Because the corner table was in his sight lineant, it was hard not to look at things in your sight line when you have trained yourself to observe. Nora Hallis was there. Book open. Cup beside her. Yevi across the table, reading something on a small device, wings softly lit in pale gold. They were not talking. They were simply occupying the same space with the ease of 2 things that have learned each other's weight and found it comfortable. Doral watched the cafeteria as a whole. He watched the way the room moved around that corner table. The Dothraki students at the center tables were louder than usual, and of term, high spirits, but none of them directed that energy toward the corner. The younger students who passed near it walked their natural lines without veering away, but also without crowding. It was a particular kind of off-space, not feared, not avoided, simply respected in the wordless way that living things develop respect for other living things when they have been given a reason. Nora turned a page. She did not look up. She did not survey the room. She did not perform awareness or composure or any of the things that people perform when they know they are being observed. She just read, and the room moved around her the way water moves around something that has decided it is staying put. Doral thought about his report. He thought about the categories he had written, the reclassification he had recommended, the careful language he had used to describe a species that had been measured incorrectly because it had been measured for the wrong things. He thought about a 9-year-old in a frozen forest who had looked at 83 kilometers of wilderness and decided to walk. Every species in the galaxy had a thing that made them what they were. The Dothraki had their strength and their pride. The Lumi had their light and their deep sensitivity. The Thauri had their patience and their long memory. They were known things, documented things, the things that got written into intake assessments and species profiles and the general understanding that the galaxy held of itself. Humans had something that did not have a clean name yet. Something older than their technology and quieter than their history suggested. Something that sat in the dark of a place that should have been fatal and looked around and said, not dramatically, not with any particular feeling, not why it was not cruelty. It was not aggression. It was not the absence of fear. It was something more fundamental than any of those things, and it lived into him so deeply that a girl could carry it through an academy cafeteria in the form of a paper book and a cup of pale tea, and most of the galaxy would never see it at all. Until they did. Doral walked to his first meeting. The station turned. The cafeteria filled and emptied and filled again to I in the corner. Nora turned a page.